What happens when we die? In the Christian imagination, for Catholics, often when we think of people dying, we hear jokes of how it is that they get to the gates of heaven, and who is standing there? St. Peter. And St. Peter is the one who lets them in or who keeps them out. Have you heard of jokes like that? How it was, for instance, that St. Peter was standing at the gates of heaven. We'll tell a priest joke today. St. Peter is in heaven, and a young couple who fell in love. Have you seen The Good Place? They found their soulmate, and they wanted to get married. And they went to St. Peter and said, we want to get married. And St. Peter said, well, the only problem is we're still waiting for a priest here in heaven. Yikes. Or I grew up with Father Herbert, the pastor of my home parish. Father Herbert liked sherbet like ice cream and just as cool, he used to say. And he once told the joke of how it was that St. Peter, standing at the gate of heaven with all these people who wanted to get in, said, okay, we're going to separate you, the men, where he was dealing with the men at that moment. He said, all of the men on one side here who are henpecked, whose wives tell them what to do, you stand in this line, and all the other men in this line. All the henpecked men, those whose wives tell them what to do in this line, everyone else in this line. And he looked, Father Herbert tells the joke, St. Peter looked at the two crowds and said, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to be in the other line with the henpecked men? And he said, well, this is where my wife told me to stand. We have these popular images of Peter being at the pearly gates. Because of today's gospel, Matthew chapter 18, where Peter is given what? The keys to the kingdom of heaven. A powerful symbol that Peter had the power to open the gates and let people in, or to close the gates and keep people out. And isn't that what keys do today? Even though they're smaller, keys open the doors to let people in or to keep people out. In today's first reading, Shebna, the guardian of the palace, has the keys to the palace and is the one who can decide who to let in and who to keep out. How does today's story end? With Shebna losing the keys. The key will be given to someone else who is more worthy. Sisters and brothers, those keys that we imagine in Peter's hand or in Shebna's hand are actually in our hands. The question is whether we will open our hearts and open our lives to God and to others, or whether we'll shut some of those people out. Yikes. The independent Catholic tradition is a rich tradition of not locking people out from the sacraments or from any other aspect of the church, but letting people in. All people in. Sisters and brothers, in today's second reading, St. Paul tells the Church of Rome how inscrutable, how awesome is God's way, because though we might be tempted to lock people out and keep them at a distance, that's not how God is. God loves and forgives, and for some strange reason, all people, bringing all people to God's self. Sisters and brothers, maybe it's time for all of us to be a little more like God. Maybe it's time for all of us to be a little more like Jesus. The model that we have in the New Testament is not of a God who punishes and sends lightning upon people or has them swallowed up by the earth. It's the model of a God who loves and forgives all people. So before you lock your heart, before you shut others out of your life, let's take seriously the call to be more and more like Christ, mindful of how it is that all of us hold keys. We can choose to let people in or to lock them out. Let's let them in.